take you with them on a bus or train, on a highway or on a plane, backstage or on a bike. It's Kevin Klein's Fuzzy Mike. Fuzzy Mike interviews. Not top of mind, not even the news. No way. Just a bunch of stuff that Kevin likes. All recorded with this Fuzzy Mike.
You get the Don King reference. It looks
either that or a tip of a horse's tail.
So we'd like to thank you all ahead of time for listening to Fuzzy Mike with your friend Kevin Klein.
My guest on the Fuzzy Mike has a laundry list of accolades to his name. He was the public health expert for the Afghanistan National Army Health System. He was the Department of Defense Global Emerging Infection Surveillance Program Director. He led investigations into large disease outbreaks and was at ground zero for SARS and avian influenza. He also conceived and conducted several human and animal protocols in support of the military's diarrhea vaccine program. At Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, he created and developed the ESSENCE program. It's the nation's first and largest syndrome-based disease outbreak recognition system. It supports the military health system, is the foundation for the National BioSense program and surveillance programs at Johns Hopkins, Harvard, all state health departments, and many health departments around the world. His pioneering work started an entirely new field of epidemiology and the International Society for Disease Surveillance. He graduated from the U.S. Military Academy West Point and the U.S. Army Military Intelligence Offer Basic Course, U.S. Army Airborne School, and U.S. Army Ranger School before serving as an intelligence officer in Infantry Divisions on the demilitarized zone in Korea and Fort Ord, California for 5 years prior to attending medical school at Tulane University in New Orleans. Following internship at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, he served as chief of the primary care and flight medicine clinics at the Pentagon, where he routinely cared for the highest levels of civilian and military leadership in the Department of Defense, U.S. Congress, the CIA, and U.S. Supreme Court, and was rated as a senior flight surgeon. Following his residency training in preventive medicine and public health at Johns Hopkins University and the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, he began a long period of international research and as a professor of the Uniformed Services University Medical School. Altogether, he retired at the military rank of colonel at the end of a distinguished 31-and-a-half-year career in the Army. My guest joining me now is retired Colonel Dr. Michael Lewis. Hello, sir.
Hi.
How are you, sir?
I'm fine. How are you?
Wonderful. I'm a couple minutes early, but I figured, when I'm talking to somebody who's retired military, 2 minutes early is better than being right on time because then you're late.
All right. Yeah, as you can imagine, it's been quite the busy week.
Absolutely.
Today, I think today being the busiest of them, the day of them all.
Things seem to be changing on a minute-by-minute basis.
Well, they do. Yeah. May we live in interesting times, right?
Yeah, we do. So I ran down the list of accolades to your credit, and I think the first place that we need to jump in at is what is the Global Emerging Infection Surveillance Program Director? What is that?
So back in '97, the Clinton administration. Basically, basically the Army and the Navy have research labs around the world, and at different times in history that's varied. But so, like the Armed Forces Research Institute of Medical Sciences, or AFRIMS, in Bangkok, Thailand, is a joint U.S. Army, Royal Thai Army research lab that's been there since like 1958. And so the DoD recognized that, hey, we've got these assets around the world. These incredible research labs that are looking at drug development, vaccine development, and all kinds of stuff. We could use those as platforms to see what's out there, emerging infections. And so it was really the Clinton administration started this program to basically give DoD money to use these research labs as platforms to figure out what's going on out there. And so I was sent over to Thailand to start the program locally in Thailand, which basically my territory was Asia.
And so you were at the forefront of avian flu and also the SARS outbreak. How does what we're seeing with COVID-19 compare to what you saw in those viruses?
We didn't have well, there was internet and there was email, but we didn't have supercomputers in the palm of our hands back then. So I think it's very similar. It's just we're being overwhelmed with way too much information.
And that's where I want to talk to you about, because as somebody who works in the media and somebody who has to be in tune with this 24 hours a day, but also somebody who suffers from depression, I am starting to feel myself go down the rabbit hole because I have to be taking in all this information, and it seems like such doom and gloom. You have various ways, various coping mechanisms that our audience can actually partake in. How do we manage this stressful time?
Well, it's about managing stress. I mean, stress, unfortunately, can really decrease, cause a pretty significant hit to your immune system. And so now all of a sudden, we're talking about, being exposed to this virus, and not just this virus, but colds and flu are still out there. They're not going away. And if you're stressing out about it and your immune system is not optimal and not functioning like it should, then you're going to be more susceptible to all these, not just the coronavirus, but you're going to be more susceptible to influenza and colds. And so there's a direct correlation to stress levels and decreased immune function. So then you start into this spiral of being, whether you're exposed or not, you're worried about it, and now you're more susceptible to it.
What is the physiological reaction of the body to stress? Why do we leave ourselves more susceptible to illness if we're stressed out?
How deep in the biochemistry do you want to get?
I figured you could probably go pretty deep on that one.
On the surface level, our reaction to stress is generally mediated a lot by inflammation. And inflammation, throughout the body, and particularly neuroinflammation or inflammation in the brain, is a big reason why we see levels of anxiety and depression or mental health issues. It's really driven a lot by inflammation, and there's a direct pathological pathway that you can follow through the biochemistry and at the cellular level of stress. Leads to elevated levels of cortisol, which leads to the cells responding with inflammation, and so there's pretty well established pathways that we understand of how stress leads to depression and mental health issues and decreased immune function.
So in this time where we're dealing with COVID-19, and according to the news outlets and the experts, we have not seen the peak of it in America, so we have a feeling that things are going to progress and get a little bit more dire. What are the ways that we can incorporate into our lives to manage the stressful times, not only going on now, but ahead?
Well, some of the things we should be doing on a regular basis, honestly. Diet and exercise are what we're always going to get back to. And so diet and exercise, what do we mean by that?
Exactly.
We're told, exercise, we're told, shelter in place, stay at home, the gyms are closed and so on. But you know what? I would be an advocate for fresh air. I mean, when I was a kid, my mother would open up the windows, even in the dead of winter, once a week, every Monday. She would open up the windows and kind of let fresh air in the house. And by the time we got home from school, she'd shut the windows and turn the heat back on. But that's kind of that old time, just kind of getting some fresh air. So you're stuck at home. Don't sit at home. Get outside, and more than just going out and getting your mail. Go for a run, go for a bike ride, best yet, go do something in nature, go for a hike or a walk in nature, and do it with your family, do it with loved ones. And so you're knocking off a couple of things. You've got the socialization of being around loved ones. Hopefully you get along. You're out in nature, and you're getting exercise. You just knocked off three really big things with one event, if you will. Food, nutrition. these are basic things we should be doing on a daily basis. Eliminate as much as possible the simple sugars, the candy, the soda, fruit juices, things that are just loaded with simple sugars. Eliminate those, and as well as the fried foods, the processed foods, the fast foods. Our carbohydrates should really only come from fruits and vegetables. We should be eating lean meats and fruits and vegetables, kind of what people talk about as a Mediterranean diet. And that's just simple stuff that you should be doing on a daily basis. So, infections and inflammation love sugar. It is gasoline to them. It is absolutely fuel. Even cancers thrive on sugar. And so by eliminating sugars and carbohydrates and keeping it to more natural carbohydrates from fruits and vegetables, we can make a big dent in how our immune system responds to this. And there's, of course, nutritional supplements that can be very helpful. Omega-3s, fish oil, CBD oil from hemp. It can be a tremendous.
So that's not a gimmick.
That's not a gimmick. I
Really?
mean, and CBD does two really, really, really important things. One is it can help decrease anxiety.
Okay.
So how we handle the stress, that's huge.
Uh-huh.
And it helps with decreasing inflammation. It interrupts those pathways I talked about at the cellular level of inflammation. So CBD can help calm down or right size or inflammation and keep us calm. I've kind of been passing around some stuff with one of the companies I work with. One of the Winston Churchill World War II poster kind of thing is keep calm, and instead of keep calm and carry on, I've been saying keep calm and take CBD.
There you go. Go back a couple of different things that you mentioned there. I always thought that limiting your sugar intake was to make sure that the brain didn't have highs and lows and, get yourself euphoric and then have this massive crash. Is that necessarily the case of what we're talking about?
Well, not directly, but it is definitely one of the many reasons why we should be cutting back on sugars.
And how much exercise should we shoot for daily, weekly, monthly?
If you could do 20, 30 minutes a day, that would be awesome. But how many people really do that? We're not talking about, assuming gyms were open, we're not talking about going to the gym for 2 hours. I mean, you can do little 5-minute things here and there. I mean, before you even leave your bedroom in the morning, you could get down and do as many push-ups as you can. I like the Fitbit concept of taking 10,000 steps. It gives us a goal to shoot for. But even the best exercise is really interval training. You think of a high school track around a football field, right?
Yes.
Sprint the straightaway and then walk or jog around the curves. Let your heart rate settle back down and then sprint again. Just doing, like 8 good sprints, you could do that in 15, 20 minutes. You don't have to be in a gym for, 2 hours to get a good exercise in.
Retired Colonel Dr. Michael Lewis is our guest. You do a lot of work with the expertise area that you're in is with brain injuries, and I know you do a lot of work with professional athletes, in particular NFL football players and in the CTE. But I want to ask you something more about the brain, and that is one of your 6 strategies to managing stress is to meditate. What if you can't turn your brain off?
Number one, that's CBD can help calm that voice down in the back of your head. But, do I sit around cross-legged and, going all day long, meditating? No. My best form of meditation is actually exercise. And I'm talking about going out and exercising, particularly in nature. I mean doing it without your phone.
Right.
I mean, leave your phone home. Back when I was a kid, even up until fairly recently, right? How did we get our news? We got our news, a morning newspaper and the evening news at dinner time. Now we've got this 24/7 news cycle. And there's not that much news out there. And so we keep hearing the same thing over. Now, of course, currently we're getting lots of updates on things, but there's not really that much news out there. We're getting reporting of opinions more than I think we're actually getting reporting of actual news.
One of your 6 ways of managing stress is practice gratitude. How does that relieve stress?
Well, there's great actual studies that show that practicing gratitude can relieve stress. Saying, we got to stop this Chicken Little. The sky is falling and the world's going to end. We're not in the zombie apocalypse. We are going to get through this, hopefully better than and sooner than we think. But, we live in the United States, the wealthiest country in the world. We've been incredibly blessed with lots of things. So even if you've lost your job, hopefully you still have a roof over your head. You have family that you can count on. Even in the worst of times, people can always find something. It just depends on, do you choose to focus on the things that you have versus the things that you've lost. And I think that's the basis of gratitude, is just be thankful even for the littlest things that you may have.
The day that the city of Houston decided to shut down all bars and restaurants to in dining and in drinking patrons, they talked to a local restaurateur, and the first thing he said was, I get to spend more time with my family right now. And then they asked him, how is this going to affect you in the long run? And he says, you know what? If I chose to think about the long run, I'd probably go crazy. He says, but how it affects me in the now is I get to spend more time with my family. And so I think it was very refreshing to hear somebody who's closing 3 restaurants actually say that, you know what, I'm looking at this on a brighter side. Is that something that can be taught, or is that something that we just have to have inherent in us?
No, I think it's something that we choose. We all know people that remind you of the Winnie the Pooh character Eeyore, and they're sometimes tough to be around. And but I'm a believer that attitude, whether it's a good attitude or a bad attitude, is something that can always be changed, and it's a choice. You could choose to have gratitude, or you could choose to be Eeyore. And, there's ways to go about it. If some people say you should keep a gratitude journal. And before you go to bed, write down the things that you're thankful for, the good things that happen during the day, or, set aside a little bit of time during the day to do that. And again, and you think about it, that's also a form of meditation. Talk about meditation, it's really about breathing. I think about like going out and, being on sports fields as my kids are growing up, whether it's soccer or football or basketball or whatever, and, a kid gets hurt and you go out, as a physician to help the kid. The first thing I did before I even looked to see what was wrong, get the kid's attention, look them in the eyes, and calm them down by, all right, we're going to take 3 deep breaths together and do it with them. As the physician, it calms me down, but it just really sets a better tone by just taking some good deep breaths. If you're feeling stress, don't forget to breathe. Just take 3 good deep breaths, and it can really help kind of turn things around as quickly as anything.
Well, and as we know, if kids see an adult kind of freaking out, then they exponentially freak out even more. So with you having your calming breathing techniques, the first person that an injured child sees really does go a long way into helping them calm down as well. And, you with your elite military experience, a few friends of ours are retired Navy SEALs, and they teach us these breathing techniques. So if it works for the military and Navy SEALs and Army Rangers, probably should work for us too, huh?
It really should. I mean, these are not some magical, mystical ways of dealing with stress. But a lot of it, you talk about Navy SEALs or Army Rangers. I mean, a lot of it becomes practice. You train for these things. And the more we're training for something, then when the real stuff happens, you're trained for it. And, I don't remember if it was Vince Lombardi or whoever in football, the saying of, you practice a lot harder so that the games are easier. And that applies to so many things in life.
Oh, championships are definitely won on the in the training field and in the weight room for football and all that stuff. I've always looked at the game as a celebration of the hard work you've put in.
It really is, and although we could comment about celebrations and gotten a little out of control. I mean, my coach is always growing up was like, when you score a touchdown or a goal or whatever, act like you do it all the time.
Exactly.
It shouldn't be something to celebrate.
We've kind of morphed into a little sports talk here. I'm curious to find out from you, somebody who treats professional athletes with brain injuries, how is a 17-game NFL season going to affect what we see in the future?
They're talking about cutting out some of the preseason games. So the number of games. Well, honestly, the first team doesn't usually play the last game or two anyway. The preseason is more about making the team, and so this is going to be one more game where it counts, and I'm not so sure that that's a good idea. And I'm not talking about concussions. I'm just talking about the wear and tear on the body, not just the head.
Now, there's a reason why it only passed with from 63 votes separating yay or nay, and it's going to be an interesting thing to see how this affects the careers going down the road. What is brain care? It's your private practice, but can you explain what brain care is? Well,
I take a very holistic, functional medicine approach to brain health and the absence of brain health, particularly with following a concussion, to where I'm not so much, all right, what are the symptoms? Let's throw some medications at the symptoms to eliminate them. I'm a little bit more interested in trying to find the root cause of why you're having a problem, and how do we right the ship. A lot of, I would say every single one of my patients, I focus on chronic concussion symptoms. People that have been struggling for months, often years. They've been through the medical system, the neurologists, and different types of doctors, and they may get medications thrown at them to try to cover up their symptoms, but nobody really got down to the basic level of how do we repair the brain itself, not just cover up the symptoms. And so that's the approach that I take.
Is it possible to repair the brain?
Absolutely. It may not be 100%. Well, it takes I'll use a big word, neuropermissive environment. We say only the brain can heal itself. Only time will heal the brain. Well, okay, if you're 18 months out and you're still having the problems of the concussion or the brain injury, how much more time are we going to give it? And it's usually almost always underlying things is being driven by inflammation. We're eating crap food, or we're not eating healthy. We're being told don't exercise because you're going to make your brain worse. These are all the wrong things. I mean, you need more blood flow to the brain. We're now science is starting to show that exercise after a head injury actually is beneficial. The idea of sitting in a dark room until your symptoms go away is the wrong thing. And in fact, that can prolong the problem. So a huge part of what I do is re-education, if you will, to undo all the wrong things that have become thought of. This is how you deal with concussions. Half the time I spend is undoing that knowledge and teaching people the right things to do. I'm absolutely believe we may not be able to get you back to 100% of where you were before the injury, but we can certainly optimize as best as possible where you can be, and that's looking at everything from your nutritional status, what you're doing for exercise, as well as even the underlying hormones in some cases.
It does make sense that what you were just saying with promoting blood flow to the brain for a brain injury and rehabilitation, because when you tear an Achilles tendon, that's a place that doesn't get a lot of blood flow, so you have to force blood flow into there to get it to heal itself. It flies in the sitting in a dark room, not doing anything, flies in the face of conventional wisdom, I would think.
Well, but yeah, it's been the conventional wisdom for decades. I laugh and joke sometimes that I was working with a colleague in Europe one time, and I was lamenting that we're not doing anything different for concussions than we would have done 500 years ago. And she says, no, that's not true. And I'm like, oh, thank goodness. She goes, no, it's at least 1,000 years.
Oh, wow. That long.
I mean, the idea that we're just going to, go sit in a dark room and not do anything and don't exercise and not deal the best way to deal with inflammation, which is you think about, I always point out, Muhammad Ali, is a great example, right? Mm-hmm. Take some punches as a young man and how he ended up later in life. What happened in between? That's inflammation, and that's inflammation that never got brought under control. So we hear about CTE and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and CTE and dementias. Well, what you need to be asking yourself is why, or what's the process? And that process is really inflammation. So unless you get the inflammation under control, and the only good way to do that is nutrition and very targeted nutrition. If you don't get that inflammation under control, we're setting ourselves up for long-term problems.
I'm kind of glad that the conversation took this direction, because I have a quick question, because you're a brain expert. Why does stress cause migraine headaches?
Stress causes migraines typically. I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but the mediation in the middle there is typically inflammation. So stress lowers our immune system through the cellular processes of inflammation, and it lowers our immune response, makes our brains more susceptible, makes our bodies more susceptible, not just to infection, but I guess one way to think about it visually would be almost like you've got some rocks at the seashore that you don't know are there until the tide goes out. And when the tide goes out, all of a sudden these rocks are exposed. So you could think of, if our bodies are like the tide, we're at high tide, we're functioning good, and then the tide goes out, and now all of a sudden some of the rocks are exposed. Whether it's our immune system that maybe not be functioning so well, or whether it's parts of the brain that aren't as functioning as well as when the tide is in.
When we were talking about, you said, do we give it 18 months and then decide to do something differently? That brings us back to COVID-19. We're hearing from some experts that it might take 18 months to run its course through America. You being somebody well-versed in viruses, what are your thoughts?
I'm incredibly optimistic. I think that there's a play here. One is we're going to flood the market with tests. Right, diagnostics, a swab, and we can, test it and have an answer in an hour or two, or whatever it is. We're in the process of we're going to be flooding the system with testing, and that's going to just inflate the numbers beyond what I'm not going to lie. It's going to look bad, but it's really what we call a testing or surveillance bias. I think as far as the reality of it, I'm really hopeful. I think by the end of this month, we may see a peak. All this social distancing and the closing of theaters and gyms and people working from home, I'm very optimistic. I think maybe we're going to peak even by the end of this month, and then kind of some normalcy returning. I'm really hopeful by the end of April.
I like your thinking, sir. I like your thinking. Where can we get more information about what we've discussed today?
Well, if when I retired from the military, I started a small nonprofit, and I've got some information. And actually, I just loaded up some information on the front page of my nonprofit website, which is brainhealtheducation.org. That's brainhealtheducation.org.
Brainhealtheducation.org. Dr. Lewis, I was going to tell you this at the outset, but we just jumped right into the conversation. You're a badass, sir.
I don't know about that.
Well,
I think
do.
I just apply a little bit of common sense to a crazy world.
I appreciate you joining us, and thank you so much for your experience, your expertise, and thanks for doing what you do for humanity.
All right. Well, thank you.
Retired Colonel Dr. Michael Lewis, thank you so much, Dr. Lewis, for joining us. Also, thanks to Crystal Gorgeous at the PR Group. The Fuzzy Mike executive producer is Trish Klein. Social media director Lisa Tynan. Production elements Zach Sheesh at The Radio Farm. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for bonus material. I'm your host, Kevin Klein. See you next time on The Fuzzy Mike.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Fuzzy Mike with Kevin Klein. Check back often and stay fuzzy, friends. Fuzzy Mike is a presentation of the Kevin Klein Fuzzy Mike Industry, Incorporated, LLC.